Hello guys, this is going to be a quick unedited video showing you how to make a magic remote using Openspace3D, which is what I've got open in front of me now. I'm going to speed through this pretty quickly, but I'm also going to show off a few things as I go along, but all in all I want to make this a nice quick video. So the first thing we're going to do when making the remote is we're going to make a new group, so add a new group, let's call this remote. This means we can separate this from the main tree, so we just go down here into our plugin view. We double click on remote and we now have this whole brand new scenery to work with. I had to pull this up a bit, spread this across, because this means we have access to everything, we can still see the screen. Right, so first thing we're going to want to do, same as pretty much always, is we want to make an AR capture. So this just tells OpenSpace that we're going to be doing AR at all. So I'm going to leave this just called AR capture instance, all the settings are as they are. So move that to the side, we actually don't bother with that. The next thing I want to do is we're going to have two markers on this magic remote. So the first input, make an AR marker. So I'm going to call this our base marker. We're not going to use one of these IDs, I'm going to be using my own. Let's up the detected features to 500. And I've pre-prepared a bunch of markers here, and the one I'm going to be using is marker 2. And just for my sakes, I'm going to set this to 0.5 meters. The fact that it's in meters is very rarely important. It's useful for standardization, but I tend to think of it as units, so it's more important for like keeping everything within the same scale as each other. So we leave that here, enable on init has to be on, and marker tracking on init. We're also going to do the next thing that we always want to do, which is put in a object hide. So this just be hide int, so we can do this hide remote. Let's camel case this. I don't have an object yet, so we're going to get to that, but I am going to leave it on hide on start. And now we want to make a new marker and hide pair, so we can just copy paste. I'm going to name this one, so let's move that down a bit. Left click marker, and we're going to change the image. So this one uses image, give me 2 seconds here, image 1. Leave that as it is. Hide remote, I'm going to make this hide left click. So I'm putting this in for demonstration purposes. I'm going to tell you how we might change this around later. So hide left click. So I'm going to put this here. Now to actually focus on the scene, I'm going to take my group here and I'm going to add a new dummy, and this is going to be called remote 2. The nesting here is important, so the group's called remote, but this is my base called remote. I want to add a new dummy called base and another dummy called left click. So I am doing this all on the fly, so I've already done this before, but if I make a few mistakes I'm going to come back and look at them, so this is going to be a little bit more improvisational than I'd usually like. So now I'm going to add a mesh, click in here. OpenSpace comes with a bunch of pre-prepared stuff, so if we go into assets, primitives, and primitive plane, so I'm going to just import that as is. We're going to deal with texturing it in a second. So leave that as is, and I'm going to do exactly the same here. Add a mesh, primitive plane. I'm going to do the first thing that I'm going to change here is the names, obviously. So edit settings. Have to give me. I don't do this as much as I should, which means I am still learning how we change this. Okay, alias. So we want to set this to our base plane and alias this as our L or L click plane. I'm being a little bit cavalier with the way I do my casing. Sorry if that offends. So let's take base plane and we're going to want to texture it. So now we go into our group materials. We want to add a new material. I'm going to call this base logo. And the file I'm going to load in, I'm just doing this as a basic, is our colours material. It doesn't matter too much. If we load this up, you see we get this menu here. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is keep this all as is and change our ambient colour to a image. I'm going to resources. I have AR markers here. I have a lot of things pre-prepared. Now notice if you're going to use any external files, they all need to be in this directory here. So Openspace3D is what they call a Skull directory. Skull can't use anything outside of here, so you will have to move everything into an Openspace3D area before it can be accessed. That's okay, so just hit that in there, ambient colour, let's leave that as is, close that all up. Scene tree, base plane, I'm going to edit materials, set the material to be base logo. Now you can see here, that's loaded in AR, close that off. The second one, I'm going to change my group material, let's add a new one, exactly the same as before, and I like to make this blue. The material file we are also going to be loading in, so it takes a brief while to get used to moving around all this. Colours material, and blue, as you might have guessed, I'm going to change ambient and diffuse colour to be full blue. Let's get rid of that, so 0, 0, and that's blue. And diffuse colour, these are all lighting terms, I wouldn't worry too much. If you change both of them you get a nice blue look to it. So let's close that off. We don't need to set any images for that, and we are going to set the material, edit materials, to be blue. Nice and simple. Whilst I'm here too, I'm also going to set scale. I'm going to set the scale of this one in global coordinates to 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. There we go. So it's half the size of our main one. You see why this is a little bit later on, but it doesn't matter too much. I also think, no, that is still set at 0.5. So the last thing I'm going to want to do whilst I'm in this view is I'm going to want to add a new mesh. And this mesh I'm going to add a little bit different. I'm going to put in a sphere. Now it doesn't matter too much which one we use, but I do like the idea of having a sphere on here. Let's change the scale, so I want this to be about 1/10 the size, so 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, there we go. And I'm just going to change the position by going up here, clicking on the move icon, and moving that to be up around about here. Maybe a little bit closer. And while I'm here too, might as well load in a new material. You're going to be used to this by now. Making these materials is fairly simple. It can be a little bit boring, and you can export them at a later date, but I'm not going to go into that now. For now I'm just going to do it on the fly as I need it. So there we go. Go back into our scene tree, change our sphere, and let's alias this. This is going to be cursor. Get rid of the rest of that. So this is what's going to be controlling our cursor, and we want to change the material, edit material, to be black. Okay. So now this is where we get to the fun stuff. If I load all this in now, once I've made a few links, we'll be able to see what goes on. So, base marker, if we find it, we want to show this. If we've lost it, we want to hide this. If we found it, we want to show it. If we've lost it, we want to hide it. This is some very normal stuff. This is saying if we find or lose the marker, what should we do? All of the plugins are event based, so it's worth thinking about it like that. Now it's important we haven't actually linked this to an object, so I'm going to link this to the head of our tree, because I want, if we've lost the base, to lose the entire remote. Okay, and if we go here, I'm going to just set this to this dummy called left click. It makes more sense to use dummies as the bases, and you can hide the entire hierarchy above it, just for consistency's sake. So now, if I load this in, and I grab my remote, I'll bring this into frame. Oh, hang about. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on here, but yeah, currently it's doing nothing at all, and we'll get back to that in a sec. Now let's try and diagnose why that wasn't doing anything. In fact, all being said, this should work, except I forgot to put the object settings in here. So we live and we learn. This I'm going to set to be base 2. And this I'm going to set to be, base 3, and this I'm going to be set to be left click. So don't forget you also need to set in the markers. I did tell you I'd probably make a few mistakes as we went through. So now, I'll bring this up, gets a little closer to the camera perhaps. Oh, it's upside down. Let's go around here. You can see we have this central thing. It's locked in the middle. This little black dot. I'll show you how we can make that a cursor. And this blue square, you just got a hint of it there. If we lose the blue square, so if I cover up my thumb, it goes away. If we find it, and we're going to be utilising this to make a click. Now I've put 4 of these markers around here. Today I'm only going to use 1, but the principle is going to be exactly the same. We can use all 4 of these as buttons or inputs. So, just going to get rid of that, put that away. Now, the next step is going to be making the mouse follow the cursor around. So bear with me on this. The first thing we're going to want to do is hop in, Object, Object Position. So this is a reference to a position of an object in the world. I want to get rid of local coordinates because I want the global coordinates from it. Get rid of the set position on start because we're actually only going to be reading it, and we're going to be reading the position of the cursor. Okay. So if I now go to input and we can access the mouse. Now all of these have some amount of inputs and some amount of outputs. So for now I'm going to be using the input for the mouse, and we're going to be setting the mouse position to the position of the sphere. So I'm just going to call this mouse. Ooh. And I'm going to call this cursor or cursor marker. Okay. And while I'm here, I'm just going to show you. You can set the mouse to be hidden, shown or ignored. I'm going to show it, but in the actual demos we will probably want to hide it so you can't see where the cursor is. So if we take the screen position, so this is something that Openspace has done very easily for us. It just says where is the sphere on the screen, and it will output that as a vector that we can feed into the mouse, and it honestly is that simple. So if I set this into set position, you'll see when I play it, it moves the mouse around for me. I'm not going to do that just yet because unfortunately if I do it that way, it's going to make it very hard for me to actually close the program because I won't have control of my mouse. So I'm going to quickly show you how to make an escape, which is we take an input from the keyboard and I call this ESC. QWERTY mode, we want E for escape. No repeat on key down, that's fine. So this will just be activated when I press ESC, or when I press my escape key. We then want to use our MISC. There's a thing called a switch, which we'll put in here. And a switch is like a light switch. It's either on or it's off, and we use left or right for this. So I'm going to go mouse free switch. And we don't want to trigger the event. So mouse free switch, I'm going to put this here. If we escape, then the key is down. Then we want to toggle this switch. The cursor marker here, instead of feeding that straight into the mouse, we're going to feed the screen position as an input, and then we're going to take, if you give me a second, left. So we're going to take our left, which is an output, and feed it into set position. So all this is doing is it's replicating that link we had earlier, but by putting it through a switch I can turn it on and off using escape. So now let's hit play, and you're going to notice something immediately when I do start getting capture. There we go. And what you're going to notice is that my mouse isn't on that little black square. It is following it round, so I am controlling the mouse, and that's fantastic. But it seems to be significantly off to the left. The reason for this, so if I press escape now, you'll see I can free my mouse. The reason for this is very simple. The position on the screen is relative to the window we're watching it in, but my mouse exists on my monitor, which is much bigger. So there are a few ways to deal with this. I'm going to deal with it the simplest way because for our headset that's all we're going to need. and that's going to be using rendering full screen. So that's simple. So if we start it off as full screen inst, let's get rid of the inst on there, don't really need that, and I'm just going to quickly feed our escape key, so key down as switch. So now I can escape pressing the escape key. So now let's load that up. You can see this is running in full screen rather than the windowed mode I had before. I can, give us a sec here, capture the mouse, there we go, and the mouse is staying exactly on that little black sphere. Now it looks like a circle because of the way we're handling the lighting. We can use any object for this, and truth be told we can also make the object invisible, so it will just look like you're moving the mouse around. I've opted not to do that, but that's entirely personal preference. So that's all it takes to have a mouse move around the screen using a bit of paper. You notice if you move it too fast, it is possible to lose the marker, although it does have a fair amount of tolerance. You can also move it back. This is about the limit to how far it will go, but this is with very low production value on the essentially bit of cardboard that I've stuck some paper to. We can improve this with better markers. So let's get rid of that, and let's talk now about how we make a click. So making a left click is fairly simple. So we're going to be dealing with this left click marker. We already saw with our hide left click that there is an option for what to do if we lose the marker. So I'm going to copy our mouse here, move it over here. It's the same mouse, but it's a slightly different instance of it. And again, give it another name, mouse L click. Like we're hitting enter. And now we're going to do something very simple, which is if we've lost it, we want to enable it. Sorry, if we've lost it, then we want to left click. And if we find it, then we want to, hang on. So I'm going to quickly change those because of the way we want to handle this. So if we lose it, then we want this to left button down. And if we find it, then we want to left button up. So this will simulate holding down and releasing the left mouse button on your mouse. And just to work with this, I'm going to load up my let's see what we're calling this, debug console. So if I call this, give me one moment here, clicked, put this down here, and every time it clicks, so we're going to be reading this from here too. So every time there's a left click, we want to print out click. Don't actually think we need the quotation marks around that. So, going to close this down, going to run this whole thing again. Obviously we can't see the console, but I am going to quickly simulate this. So, we just want to find our markers. There we go. So the markers are found. There's one click. There's two click. That's three click. And at present, when I get rid of the remote itself, that's going to show up as a fourth click. So let's quickly do that now. So I've closed the remote down, hit escape, stop the program, and if I bring up my console logs, you can see click. It's showed up as 5 clicks here. This is to be expected just because it will do odd things when the marker hasn't been found. So one last thing I'm going to be wanting to deal with here is a switch, because if we can't see the remote at all, this is the point of the base marker, we don't want you to be able to left click. So it's very simple. If we've lost this, we're going to disable tracking, or we're just going to disable the marker, and if we found it, we're going to enable the marker. So that's the last step on that. That's why we have the base. The base is going to be a stand-in for our actual remote itself. So instead of acting like a button, it's a root for the cursor, and also a marker to tell us whether the remote is in scene at all. So load that up one more time, and you can see we're found. There we go. And we can move this around. We can click. Okay. We can click. Remove. We can click. We can remove. What's happening with the lighting, by the way, is you can move the light around by clicking, and that is being simulated whilst I have the button down. If I release this, the lighting's going to stay as it is. Hold this down, move this so everything's in darkness. Find it. This is actually a feature of Openspace. This isn't something I've done. It's actually something you might want to disable. But this is the fundamentals of having a remote control working using only AR markers using Openspace3D. And thank you very much.